It was drizzling. A cold wind swept through the deserted road behind an old, long-abandoned church. A man was out walking with his dog when suddenly the dog froze. It lifted its head ears, standing alert. Then, without warning, it dashed through a rusty fence, barking loudly and clawing at a patch of wall covered in thick green moss. The plaster crumbled. A piece of rotted wood popped out of a crack in the stone, revealing inside a rusted metal box tightly locked. The dog stood still, eyes locked on the box, nose sniffing slowly. Then it howled, a long, drawn-out sound that broke off into a choked whimper at the end. The cold wind crept into the collar of his coat, seeping up the back of his neck. The man stood frozen, his eyes quietly watching the dog, as if it had just discovered something he could not quite grasp yet. The air was silent. No car horns, no footsteps. Only the invisible tension that had just fallen over the scene, a strange signal that tonight everything was about to change. His name was Marcus Reeve, 38 years old. He was once a special agent with the federal task force in charge of investigating human trafficking rings. They used to call him the man who never left a child behind. Until one time, just once, he failed. No one on the team wanted to talk about that case again. They had rescued 37 children from an interstate trafficking network, but one was missing. The last child, a 6-year-old girl. In the forensic photos, she was still alive. There was a witness who confirmed that she had been sent to a transfer camp located at what used to be an old convent. But when they got there, the place was empty. Just an abandoned room. The records were wiped clean. No blood, no signs of a struggle. The girl had vanished like she had never existed. The file was closed. The case was closed. His teammates moved on, but Marcus could not sleep at night. He began to lose faith in the system and justice and in himself. And then he vanished from the radar. He moved to a small town called Silver Hollow, a place where life seemed to move on, as if trying to forget the past. There, Marcus lived in a modest wooden cabin at the edge of the forest, bringing nothing with him but a backpack and a dog. But the dog was no pet. He was not adopted as a puppy, and he was not a gift from anyone. They had met during a routine evaluation for canine dogs who had been discharged from military service. Echo, that was the dog's name, used to be part of a psychological response unit, but had been marked as too abnormal to continue active duty. The report stated that Echo showed strong reactions to air zones with deeply repressed emotional signatures, not the scent of blood drugs or explosives, but the emotional turbulence inside humans, especially those carrying guilt fear or chronic depression. No one wanted to take Echo, except Marcus. There was something between these two beings who had both been cast aside by the system that made them recognize each other instantly. No trial period, no warm-up phase. Marcus did not talk much, and Echo never asked for affection. But every morning when Marcus walked out the door, Echo would always walk on his left side perfectly in step, as if they had been walking together for years. They did not share the same past, but they understood each other's feeling being left behind, being doubted, being labeled as too unstable to stay in step with anyone. And from that shared sense of being outcasts, they became companions. Since arriving in Silver Hollow, they lived a quiet life. Up early, a walk through the cobbled streets, a stop by the police station to drop off a few small case files, and then disappearing again into the line of trees leading back home. But out of all the roads they walked, there was one place where Echo always slowed down, the stone church on the hill of St. Jude. Marcus had always assumed that the church was nothing more than an old abandoned building like hundreds of other small churches that had been left behind during the rural restructuring across America. But Echo did not think so, or at least its body did not. The first time they walked past that place was on a misty morning in April with dew still clinging to the leaves. As soon as they turned onto the dirt road leading east of town, Echo came to a sudden stop. It did not howl. It did not growl. It just stopped. Then it turned its head and looked up at the dome, ears stiff, eyes unblinking, nose twitching in small measured movements. Marcus did not ask questions. But after that, he began to notice each time they passed by, Echo behaved the same way. It was not like when it smelled an animal or a stranger. It did not seem aggressive. It was more like it was remembering. Something silent. Something it could not let go of. The building was gray stone old architecture with shattered stained glass windows and a rusted iron gate locked from the inside. Faintly etched on the roof was a name, St. Jude Mercy Center, almost erased by moss and time. Locals barely mentioned it. When asked, they gave short replies, closed years ago, or just an old church. Once at a rare town gathering, Marcus overheard an old man mumble, "That was an orphanage." Lots of kids got adopted from there. Good thing it shut down. But when Marcus tried to ask more, the man smiled and changed the subject. So Marcus started digging. Old maps listed the site as St. Jude Mercy Orphanage active from the early 1970s to mid-1980s. It was known for placing orphans with families with the motto, "Bringing children to where they belong." Articles from the time praised its adoption rates, stories of children and couples meant to find each other. Then, in 1986, it abruptly closed. A small fire was reported, no injuries. But the basement was sealed. All adoption records from 1971 to 1985 were declared lost in the fire, unrecoverable. No final report, no investigation, no one held accountable. There was not even an apology. Marcus once thought it was just a blind spot in the system, a forgotten chapter of history no one cared about. But the more he dug, the more he felt something was off. Too many things had been lost here, records, photographs, witnesses, even memories. Everything connected to St. Jude seemed drained from the collective memory, even of those who had lived right next to it. Only Echo remembered. It did not need to read the files. No one had to tell it. Its body remembered. Its skin would shiver every time they got close. Its nose would inhale slowly, as if trying to analyze molecules that had been scattered to the wind more than 30 years ago. Some nights, Marcus noticed Echo lying by the window, eyes, open ears twitching like it was listening to something from far away. And it was that silence, the way Echo did not respond like it normally would, that convinced Marcus something had once gone very wrong inside that place. Not a burst of violence, but something slow, deliberate, organized, and protected by intentional silence. Marcus had spent enough time in that world to know the quieter a place, the more it hides. On certain mornings, Marcus tried changing their route. He wanted to test Echo's reaction. Was it just habit, or was something inside it truly still awake? But every time they neared the path leading to St. Jude, Echo would slow down. It would not turn, its head would not growl, just move as if some invisible force were tugging gently on its leash, holding it back. Sometimes it panted quickly. Other times it would walk so close to Marcus's leg it almost brushed him, as if seeking balance. Not out of fear, but as if holding back a memory with no name. Marcus began to pay closer attention. Every time Echo reacted, he stopped, stood beside it, observed. Gradually, he noticed something he had never picked up on. Before, a faint sound only audible when the world was still, the wind quiet, and birds silent coming from deep underground. It was not machinery, not animals. It sounded more like something moving slowly beneath the old stones of the church. One time, while tying his shoelace near the stone fence, Echo suddenly turned to look at him. Its eyes were different, not the usual alertness of a dog waiting for a command, but something else, as if it were trying to say something. Something it could not express in barks. That look made Marcus shiver, because it was the exact same look as the one he saw on the little girl's face, the one he failed to save in Texas. And from that moment, everything began to shift. Marcus went back to the old files. Nothing new there, but this time he started piecing together fragments, old articles, church blueprints from before 1971 state records, before the center was ever funded. He discovered that St. Jude had never been included in any official state welfare plans. All operations were privately funded with an underground adoption system that bypassed federal confirmation entirely. He also tracked down the church's former name before it was changed to St. Jude Mercy Sanctuary of the Silent Watch. There were no records of who renamed it, no official owner. Every transfer had gone through anonymous trusts. Marcus began keeping a separate notebook logging every time Echo had a reaction, time date, wind direction, weather conditions, precise location. And then, while comparing those entries to an old map of the church grounds, he realized something. Every time Echo stopped or reacted strangely, it was always at the same spot exactly 20 feet to the left of the old bell tower. That exact spot was where Echo had leapt through the fence during that rainy night, where it had clawed through the moss-covered wall, where the rusted metal box had been uncovered, and where, for the first time in over a year of living together, Marcus heard Echo howl as if a buried trauma had finally surfaced. At that point, Marcus had no more doubts. He did not need more data, more reports. Just one truth rang clearly in his mind. What was buried beneath the Church of St. Jude was not just the past. It was a secret never meant to be unearthed. The metal box was unexpectedly heavy. It had been sealed with 3 layers of rusted locks surrounded by a thick metallic skin, the kind once used to store classified documents during wartime. Marcus had to use a crowbar and hammer to pry each edge open. And as he worked, he noticed something strange. The box was not decaying from the outside in, but from the inside out. The locks were rusty, but the weld seams showed signs of reverse corrosion, as if something inside had generated its own reaction after being sealed away. When Marcus finally removed the lid, Echo stepped back. Its ears dropped, but it did not bark. It did not growl. It simply stared like it was witnessing something it had seen before. There was not much inside a leather-bound notebook, a worn fabric bracelet, a few small black and white photos the size of a palm, and a thick envelope sealed with red wax bearing an uneven cross symbol. Marcus removed each item carefully. Echo never took its eyes off them. At times, it gave a soft, sharp breath like it had caught a scent that did not belong. The notebook had no author name. On the first page, a handwritten line read, "No one will believe, but I cannot take this to the grave." The rest were fragmented notes with handwriting that changed over time, some shaky like that of a sick person. All of them spoke about nameless children brought to this church without paperwork, without any family to verify them, without medical records. The writer called them the Silent Ones, and kept repeating a phrase, "the Watchers." Marcus furrowed his brow. That term had appeared once in the old church documents in the original name, Sanctuary of the Silent Watch. The photos showed children in identical uniforms, short haircuts, eyes staring directly into the camera. None of them smiled. The images were aged, the edges scorched, but each one featured a peculiar detail, a small strip of embroidered symbols on their collars, like an internal identification code. Marcus picked up the fabric bracelet. It was small, meant for a child's wrist, stitched in faded black thread, 47B. Echo stepped forward immediately to sniff it, and at that exact moment, it shuddered, as if a buried memory had reawakened. That night, Marcus photographed everything, resealed the box, and hid it beneath the floorboards where he used to keep his personal weapons. He did not know why, but something told him this was not just evidence from the past, it was a thread, a lead into a system. A chain designed to make real people disappear and replace them with clean, perfectly managed records. The next morning, Marcus brought the bracelet and one photo to the police station, hoping to analyze the fabric and cross-check the child's face in the missing persons database. But the system crashed. When he uploaded the photo, the facial recognition software could not detect any distinguishing features, as if the face had been programmed to be unmemorable. He tried sending the items to a private lab once owned by a former FBI colleague. But just as he was preparing the package, an unfamiliar truck appeared at his gate. No license plate, tinted windows, engine running, but no one stepped out. Echo walked into the yard. Its fur bristled. Marcus stood behind hand, instinctively resting on his waist where his holster used to be. But the truck backed away slowly, then turned toward the road leading to St. Jude and disappeared behind the trees. At that moment, Marcus knew he was not the only one reopening an old case. Someone else was still watching. That night after the box was opened, Echo refused to sleep. It paced beneath the bed eyes fixed on the window where the street lamp lit the trees leading to the church. Marcus sat up. No questions, no commands. He simply grabbed the leash. Echo walked over, no hesitation. And for the first time since Marcus had taken it in, Echo walked ahead without looking back. They turned left, not down the usual trail, but through tall grass heading behind the church. Echo moved slowly, nose to the ground. Sometimes it veered off, circled back, then stopped. Marcus understood something was there. Ahead was a stone wall covered in rusted metal sheets, not part of the original structure. Echo stepped closer, gave a low bark, and sat waiting like it knew Marcus had to act. Marcus shone his flashlight between the panels. It was pitch black inside, but clearly a passage deliberately concealed. He pried at one edge. It came loose easily, as if someone had opened and resealed it before. Echo went in first. Marcus followed. A narrow tunnel led downward toward the basement that was supposedly sealed after the 1986 casualty-free fire. The air reeked of mildew and rust. Echo kept moving. At the tunnel's end was a metal door. Echo pressed its paws against it and hissed low. Marcus turned the handle. It was unlocked. When the door opened, his flashlight swept across the room, and he froze. About 33 feet long, or about 10 meters, the room had black burn marks on the ceiling and faint bloodstains on the tiled floor. Lining the walls were iron bed frames with restraints. Each had a brass tag, 23C47B61A. Echo moved to one corner, stopping by an empty bed. On the floor was a small circular dent, shaped like a claw mark. Marcus knelt. In it lay a tiny blue glass bead the same color as a girl's eyes from one of the old photos. Marcus looked at Echo. No words passed, but something in Echo's gaze said this was more than instinct. There was no doubt left. Echo had been here. Maybe not it specifically, but it had known this place, or others like it. They left the room silently. Then Echo veered into a tighter corridor, unmarked on any blueprint. Marcus hesitated. Echo growled softly, like a sign, "Trust me." At the end was a small archive room. Broken cabinets scattered debris. One drawer remained intact, jammed. Echo scratched at it. Marcus pried it open with a crowbar. Inside was a bundle of documents wrapped in fireproof plastic. Adoption records. No names, just codes and photos. Every photo had one thing in common: no smiles. And all the children wore the same small fabric bracelet identical to the 47B Echo had reacted to the night before. Marcus reached the final record. a scribbled line in red ink status replaced, "Do not enter into system." Below it was a strange symbol, 3 interlocking circles with a diagonal slash from the upper left. Marcus had never seen that symbol before, but Echo's reaction was immediate. It backed away, ears flattened, and howled again, a long, haunting sound. The second time it had ever done that since they became companions. That howl triggered a faint noise from the hallway behind them. Someone or something was inside the church. They were not alone. Marcus returned home just as dawn broke. Echo did not sleep. It simply lay beside the bed, eyes fixed on the window. All night it made no sound, but its nose kept sniffing the air, like it was monitoring every gust of wind, every subtle shift in the atmosphere around them. The next morning, there was a knock at the door. A man in plain clothes introduced himself as an officer from the State Office of Religious Record Management. His paperwork looked official, well prepared. He said bluntly, "We received information that someone has been accessing records sealed since the 1980s. Let me remind you those files are not to be recovered for both humanitarian and federal security reasons." Marcus said nothing, but Echo stood close at his feet, staring at the man, ears rigid. Before leaving, the man added a short message. "We know you failed the Texas case. Do not let that happen again." As soon as the door closed, Marcus knew they were being watched. He decided not to send the documents by mail anymore. Instead, he and Echo got in the car and drove straight to the suburbs to visit an old friend who used to work as a forensic audio and visual technician for the FBI. On the way, Echo behaved strangely. It whimpered quietly, not in pain, but as if it was being forced to remember something it could not fully express. When they reached a bend in the road, Echo suddenly growled and leapt into the front seat, blocking Marcus's view. The car swerved off the lane, but he managed to regain control and brake in time. They came to a stop on a narrow road next to an empty lot. Echo jumped out and ran toward an abandoned building. Marcus followed. The back door was locked, but Echo found a gap just wide enough to slip through. Inside was a dusty room, once a classroom. On the chalkboard, a faded line of white chalk read, "Family is where no one is forgotten." Echo sat on a small chair, old and broken. It did not howl, did not bark. It just stared at a crayon drawing pinned on the wall, a house, an adult, and 3 children standing in a row. What was strange, the first child in the drawing held a name tag marked 7B. Marcus took a picture of the drawing, then searched the room and found an old file box beneath the floorboards. Inside were scribbled notes, beginner lesson sheets, and a roll call book filled with codes instead of names. He brought the notebook and drawing home, scanned everything. But that night, his laptop froze. All newly taken photos were wiped and the hard drive was locked by unbreakable encryption software. Marcus checked the security cameras around the house. All footage from the past 48 hours was missing. But what sent a chill down his spine were muddy dog prints right outside his bedroom door, even though Echo had been sleeping downstairs. Some system or someone was actively erasing every trace, not just from files, but from memory itself. And Echo, though it could not speak, was being pulled back into a memory it never knew it had. That night, Echo howled again. But this time not from fear. It was a call for something waiting, deeper, darker, and more forbidden than the basement room of St. Jude. That night Echo made no sound. No growl, no warning at all. By morning, its leash still lay by the door, but Echo was gone. Marcus searched like a madman, called its name, posted alerts, asked all the nearby farms. No one had seen a missing German shepherd. Traffic cams showed nothing, as if it had never existed. Downstairs, Marcus checked the metal box. Still there, but the notebook was gone. Only the fabric bracelet marked 47B lay in the center like someone had left a message. We only took what mattered. Marcus collapsed into his chair. The feeling of being watched was stronger than ever, not by machines, but by memory. A kind of memory that was being controlled. That night, while checking his old hard drive, he found something strange in a corrupted backup. A few image files were named with codes, not regular file names. One of them, IMG47BRP, contained a 3-second video. Shaky, blurry. But in the final frame, there was Echo, not as it was now, but as a puppy chained in a red brick hallway next to a child. Both of them wore matching fabric bracelets. Marcus froze. His heart pounded. Echo was not just sniffing out the secret. It might be part of it. He tried to trace the video source, but all metadata was wiped. Only one detail remained. The folder name was PRJ STJ Shell 12. PRJ likely project. STJ clearly St. Jude. Shell 12 some kind of code. Or a location. Marcus drove to the old administrative building once used by the church, abandoned since 1990. Inside, only empty filing cabinets remained. But when he shined his flashlight across the wall, he saw at the symbol 3 interlocking circles, exactly like the red seal on the secret records. And below it, embossed in faded Latin, Et qui tassent clamant. Even those who are silent are screaming. Marcus shuddered. Echo had tried to bring him here, not to investigate further, but to witness. To understand that there was a deeper layer of memory, not his, not Echo's, but from the victims erased from this system and still lingering somewhere. That night, Marcus returned home, sitting motionless in the living room. The wind blew through the window, and he saw it a faint trail of mud with dog prints, only 3 toes, dragged as if being pulled, leading from the yard to the doorstep. Just beneath it, a scrap of paper, handwritten in the same style as the missing notebook. The records were not lost. They were replaced. Echo never left. You are simply no longer allowed to see it. Marcus gripped the paper. His hand trembled. Only one question echoed in his mind. If Echo is not gone, then where is it now? And who is rewriting the memories of people like me? Marcus did not sleep that night. He sat frozen under the dim light of his desk lamp, hand clenched around the note with its jagged handwriting. The line Echo never left was not just a message, it was a blade cutting into the last sliver of trust he had left. He no longer knew what was real. Echo, his companion, the last anchor holding him to reality, was now tangled in the vortex of a silent past. But deep in his chest, something urged Marcus to rise, not to solve a case, but to hear that familiar footstep again, to see those eyes just once more. As the sun rose, Marcus drove west, following an old map drawn on a scrap of paper once found inside the metal box. A single coordinate was marked deep in the forest, once a storage site for St. Jude Church before 1980, now erased from official records. The dirt path was overgrown with roots and rotting leaves. No one had been here in years. But when Marcus stepped out of the car, something caught his eye dog prints, clear paired stretching into the woods. Not fresh, but not old enough to have washed away. It was Echo's trail. The distinctive gait only it had left leg always a beat slower than the right from an old knee injury. Marcus followed one step at a time. No rush, no fear. Each step a countdown towards something waiting. Not evidence, but a response from a soul that had never truly left him. After more than 30 minutes of hiking, Marcus reached a small wooden cabin nestled in the valley. The door was unlocked. Inside was pitch black. But the moment he stepped in, he smelled it. Echo. On the floor lay a worn collar placed gently, not discarded. Nearby, a scrap of cloth identical to those used for children's bracelets at St. Jude. Marcus entered. Called its name, but no sound came. His heart thundered in his chest. Suddenly, from the basement, a faint whimper, like a breath or a memory. He ran down, banged the door, tore at the boards, used all his strength to open the old hatch, and Echo was there, skin and bones, but alive, alert, its eyes wide, never leaving his. No wounds, but clearly starved for days. No chains, no guards, as if they did not bother locking it because they believed no one would ever find it. Marcus wrapped his arms around its neck. Echo gave a soft grunt, then pressed its head into his chest, as if every word had already been spoken because it had always known he would come. They left the house, but just as they reached the door, Marcus saw it, a thermal camera mounted on a tree, active, its red light blinking. They knew he had found it, and maybe that was what they wanted. Back home, Marcus examined Echo's collar. Inside a small chip, a special RFID not registered with any rescue agency. He sent it for analysis. And the results just one day later left him stunned. The chip linked to a 1977 identity research project under the name Division of Family Integration, funded by the Department of Health and Human Services. Attached was a brief handwritten note. Subject 47B entered pilot program for cross-species memory grafting. Stable response, strong reaction to scent, voice, and emotional stimuli. Identification retention at 94% after 6 years of indirect exposure. And below that one word, Echo. Marcus let the paper fall. He did not speak. He did not breathe. Echo was not just a witness. It was the living vessel for memories that had been erased, hidden, torn from the record, but still alive in every reaction, every choked howl in the night. Those memories did not need to be retold, because they lived in the eyes of a dog in the pain with no name, and now in the steps of a man who no longer feared the truth. Marcus sat still in the dark room, eyes locked on the message flashing on screen. Cross-species memory integration, 94% response rate. Echo's file had never been listed in police dog records. It belonged to another branch, an experimental post-war psychological program labeled Humanitarian Recovery. But to Marcus, every word revealed something more terrifying than nightmares. He was not investigating a disappearance. He was uncovering a substitution. The children from St. Jude had not vanished as the records claimed. They were adopted, but not in the traditional sense. They had their identities, histories, and names reassigned, placed into families under a government-sponsored program. Legally, they were rescued, but in truth, their original memories were wiped, their pasts severed, and they grew up never knowing who they truly were. Marcus reopened every file he had ever reviewed. Every dot on the map where a child had been adopted matched a nonprofit once funded by the Division of Family Integration. And most shocking of all, not a single child from St. Jude had ever returned looking for their origins. Because none of them remembered St. Jude existed. Echo somehow had retained the scent trail of those who had touched those children. It did not forget because it was not trained to forget. On the contrary, it had been chosen because it remembered, because its sense of smell and emotion preserved the original bonds. And now, with every step it took, another memory came back to life. Among the documents Marcus found that night was an excerpt from an internal letter stamped "Top Secret." We do not erase memories, we replace them with new frames of reference. A child with no real name, no birthplace is a blank canvas, and the one holding the brush is us. The letter was signed by one man, R. Whitmore, director of the Division of Family Integration, from 1976 to 1989. But when Marcus dug deeper, he discovered that Whitmore had not vanished. He was alive, living in a gated community on the outskirts of Missouri, under the title founder of the original Family Recovery Program, a group known for giving talks about psychological identity and community reintegration. Marcus drove through the night Echo in the passenger seat. They arrived in Missouri at dawn. The community was heavily secured. Guards stopped them at the gate. But something strange happened the moment Echo stepped out of the car. The security dog inside the compound immediately lowered its tail. It did not bark. It did not approach. It backed away, whimpered softly, then turned and left. Marcus did not need any more proof. He was not allowed inside. But as he was getting ready to leave, a middle-aged woman stepped up to the gate and quietly asked through the bars, "That dog, was it ever called Benji?" Marcus looked at Echo. The dog did not react, but its eyes for the first time filled with tears, and a faint whine escaped its throat as if a long-buried memory had suddenly risen back up. The woman cried. She did not know why, but she whispered, "My son used to have a dog just like that. Back then, he used to say, 'Benji remembers what the world forgot.'" Marcus asked, "What was your son's name?" She answered, "Jason Whitmore." Marcus felt like someone had punched him in the chest. Jason, son of R. Whitmore. And Benji, none other than Echo, had once been the companion of a child, possibly a victim of the very program his father created. And then the woman said one last thing before turning back inside. Jason died in 1992. Sudden death. No one knew why. But the night before, he told me one thing. If a dog can remember what humans choose to forget, do you think it should stay silent forever? Marcus did not respond. He looked at Echo, and for the first time, he understood why that howl that night had been so choked. It was not from fear, it was from pain, because Echo somehow had witnessed the silence forced upon those children, and now it had been chosen to survive, to speak the things no one wanted to hear. Marcus returned with two things clashing inside him. One was a choking sorrow for the children whose lives had been rewritten. The other, rising from deep within, was rage. Not blind rage, but fury at how a civilized nation could erase an entire orphanage, an entire human system, simply by changing names and burning records. He no longer had doubts. The truth was buried not on paper, but within layers of encrypted data protected by an artificial intelligence system built to restructure records under the guise of humanizing information. That was how they blurred the lines using identity protection as an excuse to strip original identities. But Marcus had one advantage, Echo. It did not need a server. It did not need cables. Its memory was stored in scent sound and biological response, something no algorithm could replicate or delete. Marcus began planning a break-in at the old St. Jude data center where original records were stored before the fire in 1985. According to old blueprints beneath the stone church was a 3-level secure archive, fireproof, waterproof, and hidden from attention. There was no official entrance, but based on Echo's past alerts, there had once been an old access tunnel used to deliver food to the orphanage kitchen. Marcus used a ground radar scanner to pinpoint the entry hatch. 3 nights later, he and Echo returned. The sky was clear, but the wind was harsh. The church stood in silence, like a stone corpse buried in memory. The back door was rusted, the lock still broken from before. Marcus slipped in quietly. Echo led the way. They moved through dusty corridors to a wall near the kitchen. Echo froze, looked left, scratched lightly 3 times, then lay down, ears alert. Marcus followed the scratch marks, found a tiny crack near the floor. Using a crowbar, he pried it open, revealing a rotted wooden hatch. Beneath it, stone stairs leading downward. No lights, no sound, only the smell of dampness, and something else, old paper ash, mixed with bleach. Echo wrinkled its nose. then let out a soft hiss. Marcus followed, flashlight in hand, heart pounding with every step. The bottom floor was a square room about 320 square feet. In the center stood an old Zenith data system computer. No power. But in the corner, Marcus found a backup battery connected to an early IBM data processor. He plugged in a converter. The screen flickered. A DOS interface lit up. The first line, login. Marcus tried a few random guesses. Nothing worked. Echo approached, sniffing, then suddenly scratched the wooden desk beside them. They're faintly etched into the wood 47B INID code. Marcus typed it in. The screen flickered again, then flashed a greeting, "Welcome, handler." The system opened. Lines of data filled the screen, only codes, no names. But Marcus recognized them. STJ 12.4 memindex, STJ 23.9 reassign, echo pattern B47.2. He opened one at random. It contained strings of DNA records alongside a strange label, reparenting index. Beneath it, black and white surveillance footage, no audio. A child was brought into a room crying. A woman approached, comforting. Every time the child looked into her eyes, an electrical pulse emitted from a head device, like a kind of memory programming. After 30 days, the child called her mother. Marcus recoiled. This was no longer a humanitarian program. This was systematic identity erasure. Echo began to hiss quietly. It walked toward the end of the room, scratched at the floor. Marcus knelt down, lifted a panel. Beneath it were not documents. They were bones, dog bones, broken, shattered in ways that suggested torture. Marcus knelt in silence. Echo did not howl. It simply sat beside him like it was asking for an explanation. But he had none. Only one option remained: extract all the data and release it before the system could wipe itself. Because Marcus knew he and Echo would not get another chance. As the old hard drive disconnected from the machine, Marcus knew he was holding something no one else had dared keep for 4 decades: the truth. He drove away from the church before sunrise, keeping every move in the shadows. Echo lay in the back seat, eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. As if it already knew they were being followed. Not if, for sure. 2 hours later, Marcus arrived at his old town, where the only satellite internet hub strong enough to transmit encrypted data out of state was located. He entered a computer repair shop owned by an old friend, Kenny, once a cybersecurity engineer for the military. Marcus said little. There's something the world needs to see. No time to wait for permission. Kenny plugged in the drive. The system whirred. Over 10,000 encrypted files began to unpack. Each file was a child, a memory, a name change, a so-called humanitarian conversion. When the download reached around 60%, a system alert popped up: access conflict. Kenny cursed. Someone's onto us. They're blocking it at the source. We have less than 15 minutes. Marcus nodded, gave Echo a signal. No one else understood it, but Echo did. It turned and ran to the door. Moments later, a black SUV rolled up, no sirens, no plates. 4 men in plain clothes stepped out. Marcus knew who they were. The lead one spoke softly. Hand over the dog. It is federal property. Marcus said nothing. Echo stood in front of the door. It did not growl, just stared. That stare colder than any winter night. One man drew a stun baton, moved forward. Echo lunged like a shadow. It did not bite, just knocked the weapon from his hand, then backed off, like a warrior. A gunshot rang out. Echo staggered, but did not fall. Marcus drew his gun not to shoot, just to say, "You can kill me. But if I do not return in 30 minutes, this data will go to the press, human rights groups, and international courts." The leader hesitated. "You think people will believe the dog's story?" Marcus did not answer him. He knelt down, cradled Echo, blood soaking through the fur at its shoulder. But its eyes remained clear, focused on the man's face, trying to remember one last time. I do not need them to believe, Marcus said. I just need them to see. A siren wailed in the distance. Kenny had called local police not to intervene, but to prove they were not alone. The four men got back in the SUV. No threats were left behind. They did not need to. The system was threat enough. But Marcus no longer cared. 2 days later, an independent news channel released a special report exposing the U.S. Department of Health's Reparenting Protocol program from 1971 to 1985. At the same time, a video went viral on social media footage of a canine dog, thin-wounded but growling beside the church archive of St. Jude as if pointing directly at history. The hashtag #EchoRemembers spread across the internet. Hundreds of former orphans began asking questions. Many could not find their real parents. But for the first time, they were given the right to doubt. Marcus refused all interviews. He appeared only once in a video sitting beside Echo, now recovering at a veterinary hospital. He said, "This dog cannot speak, but it remembers. And its memory is something you cannot encrypt or erase. Because memory, when loved, will always find its way back." Echo looked up, then gently rested its head in Marcus's hand. And in that moment, the world understood. Sometimes a dog that remembers is the most dangerous thing to those who want everything to be forgotten. Echo was taken to the veterinary hospital. Everyone there treated it like a hero, not because it was a police dog, but because there was something in its eyes that went beyond the idea of duty. It chose not to forget. Marcus sat beside Echo every day, his hand resting gently on the bandaged area near its neck. The vet said the bullet had grazed a motor nerve just half a centimeter deeper, and Echo would never have stood again. But no one said that out loud. No one dared meet the dog's eyes and speak the painful truth it had nearly died simply because it remembered. Meanwhile, the news kept spreading. Audio files, videos, and records pulled from the St. Jude Church hard drive were gradually verified by independent groups. The public was stunned to learn that a program once hailed as a beacon of hope for orphans was actually a system designed to erase children's identities. Hearings began in the states involved, but the most haunting thing was the witnesses, the St. Jude children. None remembered anything. A woman named Laura, 48 years old, who had lived there in 1983, stood during a hearing and said, "I don't remember anything. I was adopted at 6. My mom said, I was born in Iowa. But when I look at the orphanage photos, I see myself. The hair, the eyes, but I can't recall. I just cry, and I don't know why." She broke down in tears right there in the chamber, not from pressure, not from blame, but because something buried deep in her soul had surfaced at last. And Echo, seated quietly beside Marcus, let out a soft breath. Its ears perked, as if it had caught the real scent of memory in that woman's tears. Marcus began receiving letters from across the country. Not thank yous, but fragments of forgotten memory. A man said he once met a boy in 1981 who kept asking, "Do I really have a real name?" An elderly woman shared that all the letters she had ever written to her adopted child were returned with no explanation. A retired police officer sent in a clipped audio tape in it, a child's voice sobbing, "What's my name? My real name?" The sounds were unclear, but Echo heard it. It heard every breath, every frequency of fear, and each time it turned to Marcus and gave a slight nod. No one could explain it, but Marcus understood Echo was retrieving memory not from external records, but from deep inside the pain of others. He began recording these moments, turning them into a sequence called the Living Memory Log, captured through Echo's reactions. The interface was simple. Anyone could send in a voice recording, Echo would respond, and Marcus would log and store the result. Within just 3 days, the project, titled Echo Remembers had received over 12,000 submissions. One message read, "I don't remember anything about my past, but when I look into that dog's eyes, I believe that somewhere, someone or something once truly knew who I was." That sentence went viral. No one cared anymore whether Echo was a biological anomaly or just a highly trained dog. What mattered was that it looked at people as if they were fractured pieces, and each time it caught the scent of memory, it did not turn away. Marcus realized he had never truly rescued Echo. It was Echo who had saved him. And this time it was not just saving him, it was saving an entire generation that had been swapped out of their own lives. When a journalist once asked if Echo understood its role, Marcus simply said, "I don't know how much it understands, but I do know it never lets go of what it chose to hold on to. And that perhaps is why the world watched it, not because it was a hero, but because it never chose silence." That night it rained lightly, not the kind of downpour that washes away traces, but a gentle rain, like it was trying to draw people back to something left unsaid. Echo stood once again before the rusted fence. 7 weeks had passed since the first metal box was found. 7 weeks since that first haunting howl shook the internet. And 7 weeks since Marcus learned there was still something here that Echo had not taken its eyes off of. It did not look at the church as something sacred. It did not bark like the first time. It simply walked slowly, ears alert each step, as if retracing a fracture in its mind. Marcus followed in silence, one hand on the leash, but he did not pull. In that moment, he realized he was no longer walking a dog. He was being led back to something the whole world had tried to forget. Echo turned left, not through the main entrance, but through a narrow alley beside the chapel. A path Marcus had never noticed. Overgrown grass, vines everywhere, as if no one had set foot here since 1986. Echo stopped before a moss-covered stone wall lower than ground level. It let out a soft breath. No growl, no howl, just dug. Marcus knelt, digging with his hands alongside it. His fingers struck something solid, a rusted iron frame, a hatch. What was underneath he did not know, but Echo was already standing still, waiting for him to open it. Inside was a sealed room, damp and low. There was no scent of documents, no human presence, only the lingering smell of old baby powder mixed with vinyl, the kind used in vintage dolls. His flashlight caught a tilted wooden shelf in the corner, lined with dozens of small cardboard boxes, each labeled by hand, Angela Matthew Noel Kimberly. Marcus opened one. Inside was a tiny handmade fabric bracelet. No last name, just a code, SJ83MA2. And beneath it, a crayon drawing, a child holding a ball standing in front of a church. Behind the child was an adult with no face, just a gray blur, and the scribbled words, "This is home, but I don't know who I am." Marcus was speechless. Echo gently placed its paw on another box. It did not scratch, did not dig, just rested its paw, asking him to look inside. Marcus opened the box. There was no bracelet, no drawing, just an old hospital tag, faded but legible temporary name, Nathaniel. Estimated age on entry, 2 to 3 years old. Status, prolonged silence. Minimal response to name calling. Abnormally high scent recognition ability. Marcus froze. Beneath the tag was a black and white photograph, a small boy with curly hair sitting in the lap of a dog that looked just like Echo, only older. No caption, no name, but those eyes were unmistakably Echo's. Marcus's throat went dry. Had Echo once lived here, not as a tool, but as a witness? A living being confined with the children, meant to observe, to monitor, to test cross-species emotional bonding between non-verbal animals and identity-stripped children. Echo now lay down, eyes half closed, not in pain, not tired, but as if it were remembering. Marcus no longer had doubts. Echo did not remember those children because it was trained to. It remembered them because it had been one of them. The last living memory from St. Jude Orphanage. No other survivors. No one remembered. No one spoke. Only Echo. And somehow it chose not to forget. Marcus carried it out of the vault. They sat beneath the church's awning. The rain still fell, not hard but cold. Marcus lowered his head and whispered, "I'm sorry I thought I saved you. Turns out, you were the one who never left anyone behind." Echo did not howl, did not lick his hand. It simply nestled its head into his lap and closed its eyes. No one said anything else. But in that quiet rain, they both understood some memories do not need repeating, as long as someone chooses to remember. And finally, one short audio recording. A male voice, old, slightly trembling. "I did not think anyone would ever find this. If you are listening, I am probably dead. And if that dog is still alive, then he is the part of me I could never erase. I never hated children. I just believed in restructuring. But they turned it into a market. And me, I was only the one who opened the door." Marcus clenched the box. Echo was already lying down, its head resting at the base of the statue. It did not need anything more. 3 weeks later, the first formal hearing was held. For the first time in history, a dog was presented as undeniable emotional evidence, with a sequence of Echo's biological reactions to identity records of the children. A neurologist confirmed Echo is not reacting out of conditioned behavior. It is responding through emotionally integrated memory, and that only happens in a being that has actually lived those circumstances. Following this, the name R. Whitmore, the current director of the Division of Family Integration, was brought into a public investigation. With the evidence Marcus had, he could no longer deny his role in the reparenting protocol. A congressional subpoena was issued, marking one of the largest inquiries into the financial and humanitarian sectors in over 2 decades. A special Senate committee was formed to investigate all families involved. 4 major names were indicted. A former judge was forced to renounce all honors. 3 corporations behind the funding were dissolved and ordered to pay compensation. More importantly, over 200-300 individuals who had once been orphans found their true identity records through the restored files. They learned their real names, their birthdays, who last held them before they were taken, and all of it. Started with one dog that refused to forget. On the morning of the final hearing, Echo could not get up. Marcus carried him out to the backyard where the early sunlight touched the green grass and a breeze moved gently. Echo did not howl, did not bark. It just looked up one last time, as if to say, "I brought you this far." And then it closed its eyes, peacefully. Marcus buried Echo in the grassy field near the church. The gravestone bore no word dog. It only read, "Memory never dies, if someone is brave enough to hold on to it." The story ended there. No sequel, no continuation. Only an echo of a 4-legged soul that walked through the darkest corners of humanity to shine a light on what we tried to forget. A year after Echo's passing, the grassy patch beside the old stone church still held the imprint of its paws. Locals called it the seat of memory. Marcus never returned to law enforcement. He no longer carried a gun, no longer wore a radio on his hip, but he carried something else, the voice. Once a week, he appeared on a nonprofit program called The Forgotten Ones, telling the stories of unsolved cases of children who had lost their names. Every story began with the same line, "There was a dog who remembered for them." When asked why he kept doing it, Marcus simply smiled. "I once thought about ending everything, but Echo would not let me. He looked at me like there was still something left to do." I didn't know what it was until he found that first box. Echo's presence lingered not just in Marcus's stories. A young man named Julian, once renamed, transferred through 3 orphanages, never knowing who his parents were after having his true identity restored through data from the metal box, came to visit Echo's grave. He sat beside the patch of grass for 3 hours, saying nothing. In his hand was a folded piece of paper, an adoption form marked "Denied" in handwritten letters. Before leaving, Julian said just one sentence: "I do not remember Echo, but he remembered me." No one replied, but everyone present that day understood the story of Echo was not something to retell. It was something to carry forward. In another state, a woman named Naomi, now an elementary school teacher, who had been adopted under the Talent Development Priority Program, a division of Whitmore's model, took a leave of absence to move to Washington, D.C. She became a volunteer at the Orphan Truth Center. She was the first to propose a handbook titled "Do Not Let Me Forget Myself," a guide to help orphaned children preserve personal information, emotions, and routines, even if separated from parents or relocated. She said Echo proved that you do not need words to preserve someone's memory. We, those who almost forgot ourselves, have to learn that from him. From a dog that once seemed only capable of sniffing, barking, and following instinct, Echo had become the collective memory of lives once abandoned. Its death did not close the story. It made the living ask a question: is someone out there needing to be remembered because they cannot do it themselves? Whenever Marcus reached the end of the story, he always paused for just a second, as if waiting for the imagined sound of 4 soft footsteps. But the story did not end there. It continued quietly in the way those who listened began to change. Someone returned to the old stone church to leave a bouquet of flowers at the spot where Echo once stood. Someone else hand-wrote a letter to Congress, just 2 words: "A soul." And a group of strangers, none of whom knew each other, organized the first memorial gathering. No stage, no loudspeakers, just silence beneath the whispering wind at the seat of memory. Among them, no one recognized the man standing at the end of the row, faded gray shirt glasses around his neck, a face once seen on national hearings. But Marcus recognized him instantly. The former senator did not speak, did not pose for photos. He simply bowed, placed a bouquet of white chrysanthemums, and laid down a sealed envelope. Then, he quietly turned to leave. But before walking away, he looked up at the stone where Echo once rested and said softly, "There are laws that should not be written from behind a desk, but from memory." 3 weeks later, a draft bill quietly appeared in a closed congressional bulletin, a proposal to protect the right of orphaned children to trace their original identity. No specific case was cited. No names were printed in bold. But in the introduction, there was one line that had to be read twice. "We write this not for those who could speak, but for those who could not, and for a soul that had no voice but was heard." The law did not carry Echo's name. There was no clause that mentioned a canine dog, but anyone who had witnessed what happened knew this was the first thing Echo did after it died. That year, a wave of new policies was passed. A decentralized identity system was created to protect the original records of every orphaned child, regardless of where they lived or who had guardianship over them. A federal independent council was established to review all orphanages and adoption centers suspected of altering records and to reopen investigations into all unverified cases. All domestic and international adoptions were now required to be digitally archived. For 100 years, no one would have the authority to erase them. And above all, one forgotten question was rewritten in the confirmation section of every adoption application. Do you commit not to withhold any information about the child's origin? The question was optional, but if left blank, the application would be denied. In a small eastern state, a new field was quietly added to orphan records. It was called the Echo section. No name, age, or medical history was required. Just one line. If you could keep only one thing to remember who you are, what would it be? One child wrote the sound of the caretaker reading bedtime stories. Another wrote the dog that never looked away from me when I could not cry. And maybe that was the real law Echo left behind. Not something written in legislation, but something etched into a new way of remembering a world where memory could not be erased simply because it came from someone without a voice. Marcus was no longer seen at memorial events the following year. It was said that he had moved away to live near the ocean somewhere warm enough for both a man and a memory with no shape. But now and then, children whose identities he had helped recover would say he still sent them birthday cards, each with the same message, "You are not invisible." Someone remembers that you existed. In the back corner of the old stone churchyard, the seat of memory still remained a simple wooden bench beneath the grave marker that never used the word dog. Every year, hundreds of people came to sit there. No one said much. Some brought faded photographs, torn birth records, old bracelets, or nothing but a scattered memory. But they sat, and strangely, none of them felt alone. Some left silently, but pinned handwritten notes behind the bench. I didn't find the answer. But thank you for giving me a place to ask. Or simply, I'm not afraid to remember anymore. Memory, after all, is not something we hoard or fight over as if it were ours alone. Memory is what tells us we are not blank pages. And sometimes it takes a four-legged soul to step ahead so that humans can find the courage to follow. Echo did not need a statue, did not need to be called a hero. But its story, from a strangled howl in the rain to the lines of law now written, proved something simple yet profound. One being can change a country if it acts with the right instinct, and if anyone is clear-headed enough to listen. If you are watching this video and you have ever thought your memories were not worth anything, if you have ever felt like a shadow wandering through a world too wide to see you, remember this story and remember Echo, because maybe what you are carrying in silence is exactly what the world needs to hear. You do not need a voice that echoes loudly. You just need the courage to face the truth and to never look away from what someone is trying to bury. And if you even just once felt your heart sink for a moment, or felt that Echo might still be somewhere inside this story, leave a like as a way to say, "I heard you." And if you want to follow more stories that are deep, heartfelt, and human like this one, do not forget to subscribe, because who knows, the next journey might also begin with a single howl in the night.